The terminal buzzed with polished calm, a scene of corporate serenity. But within 10 minutes, that calm would shatter because someone made a decision they would soon regret. Malik Darnell, CEO of Onyx Tech Systems and one of the most powerful figures in global tech infrastructure, walked through Cordavia International Airport like any other frequent flyer. No entourage, no drama, just quiet presence and first-class credentials. But that morning, a single moment of veiled disrespect would ignite a chain of events that sent shockwaves through the airline industry. Denied his reserved first-class seat without explanation, Malik was offered a plastic maintenance chair in the galley, a seat unfit for any passenger, let alone a security-cleared executive. Some laughed, others looked away. But Malik didn't argue, he sat, and within minutes triggered a legal clause that forced the aircraft into an emergency landing. Not out of ego, out of strategy. What followed wasn't a tantrum, it was a masterclass in power patience and accountability. Before we dive into how Malik turned humiliation into corporate reckoning, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what happens when a folding chair grounds an entire flight. The boarding tunnel was cool and dimly lit, the low hum of the aircraft ahead almost soothing. Malik Darnell stepped inside with the quiet confidence of a man who never needed to announce his arrival. His blazer, dark charcoal with a fine herringbone weave, caught the soft light with every stride. As he neared the entrance of the aircraft, a young attendant at the threshold greeted him with a polite nod, routine, nothing more. But just as Malik reached the first-class cabin, a taller flight attendant stepped into his path. "Sir, I'm afraid we've overbooked," the man said, the words delivered with sterile professionalism. Malik paused. His ticket, booked weeks in advance, was for seat 2A, first class confirmed. "I have a reserved seat," he said calmly, producing his phone with the confirmation pulled up. The attendant didn't even glance at it. "Yes," he replied, "but we've reassigned some seating. You're not on the primary roster." Malik's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. "Then where am I seated?" The attendant gestured vaguely behind him. "We've arranged a folding seat in the galley." A beat of silence passed. "A folding seat?" Malik asked. "Yes," the attendant said, unfazed. "It meets FAA regulations. It has a belt." And there it was, not a mistake, not a logistical error, but a message: you don't belong here. Not dressed like that, not today. And certainly not ahead of the upgraded passenger who had taken his rightful seat. Behind Malik, the hum of activity in the terminal carried on. Travelers flowed in and out. Announcements echoed over the intercom. But inside the cabin, something shifted, something cold, calculated. The silence around them grew denser. Malik looked past the attendant into the first-class cabin. The seats gleamed under ambient lighting, crisp white pillows and untouched champagne flutes waiting at every place. Passengers were still filtering in, but none looked inconvenienced. There were no signs of overbooking, no chaos, just order and exclusion. Without saying another word, Malik stepped forward toward the galley. The younger flight attendant had already pulled out the seat. It was a collapsible maintenance chair with exposed steel legs and a belt that looked like it had been cut from a cargo strap. Malik's eyes flicked toward the attendant's face. Nervous, avoidant. Malik sat. The metal groaned under his weight. It was barely balanced, bolted into the wall beside the food storage compartment. There was no legroom, no armrest, no tray table. It was quite literally the worst seat on the plane, and it had been handed to him with the quiet suggestion that it was better than nothing. As Malik settled into the folding chair, the cabin around him resumed its pre-boarding hum. Champagne bottles popped open. Welcome menus were distributed. No one spoke to him, no one acknowledged him. A man in a tailored blue suit glanced over briefly, then looked away. A steward rolled past, glanced down at him, and without a word tossed a packet of salted peanuts onto the ledge next to Malik's feet. No drink, no welcome, just the same silent treatment given to those expected to stay quiet and stay put. But Malik wasn't just another overlooked passenger. He adjusted his posture, set his leather satchel across his knees, and slowly reached inside. His fingers closed around a matte black tablet, secure, customized, coded. This wasn't just a piece of tech. It was a gateway to something much larger. And as the plane taxied toward the runway, Malik powered it on, not to distract himself, but to begin. In moments, he opened a private channel, a live stream activated, silently beaming from the tablet's hidden camera out to his legal and executive team. No drama, no warning. Just raw footage. Malik Darnell, one of the most influential minds in AI infrastructure, seated on a maintenance chair in the galley of a luxury jetliner, while first-class passengers were pampered in the rows ahead. He didn't flinch. He didn't yell. He let them hang themselves with their silence. Malik Darnell sat in stillness, his body rigid against the unforgiving metal of the folding chair, his breath slow and deliberate. Around him, the first-class cabin buzzed with its own rhythm. Chilled champagne glasses, clinking against porcelain dishes, whispered laughter. The crisp turn of pages from glossy travel magazines. He was inches from privilege, yet worlds away. But beneath the surface of his calm expression, something was building. Not rage, not resentment, strategy. The matte black tablet on his lap flickered softly, its screen dimmed for privacy. On it, 4 small icons glowed green live feeds sent to his legal counsel, chief ethics officer, PR strategist, and executive assistant. Malik didn't look at the screen. He didn't need to. The footage was speaking for itself. Captured in high definition, the cold delivery of a folding chair. The flight attendant's refusal to even glance at his confirmation. The gall of an airline to offer peanuts to a man worth more than the aircraft itself. And most damning of all, the offhand laughter that leaked from behind the galley curtain, caught perfectly by the microphone embedded in his tablet case. Guess folding chairs are fine for people like that. It wasn't the first time Malik had heard it, but this time he had receipts. He reached into his blazer and retrieved a slim, encrypted fob. He slid it into the tablet's port. Instantly, a new protocol lit up: Aether Initiate Compliance Clause. At a glance, it might have seemed like a data stream, but this was something only a handful of technocrats in the world had access to. Clause 7E, buried in civil aviation compliance law. A fail-safe designed by Malik himself years ago when his AI navigation division collaborated with federal agencies to create emergency override pathways for aviation safety. It had never been activated. Until now. He tapped once. The clause triggered a ping to Onyx Tech's secure aviation server in Darvane City. Within moments, the signal bounced to the Cordavian Oversight Board's legal alert system, flagging an incident of non-compliance. The language was sterile clinical, just a log of seat placement and passenger class mismatch. But Malik knew the weight it carried. In another city thousands of miles away, a terminal in Onyx HQ lit up red. Troy Gordon, head of crisis protocol, leaned forward in his chair, squinting at the message. His jaw tightened as he picked up the encrypted landline and made a single call to a private airfield. "This is Tier 4, he said. "Activate alternate landing prep." Back in the cabin, Malik raised his eyes to meet those of the flight attendant walking by. The man didn't speak, didn't smile. He just moved with rehearsed indifference. Malik's gaze didn't waver. Not anymore. The time for quiet had passed. He leaned back slightly, pressed a second prompt on the tablet, and opened a text draft. This is not about a chair. It's about assumption. About the belief that a man who doesn't look like a VIP couldn't possibly be one. "You treated me like baggage. Now watch me land this entire flight." He didn't send it. Not yet. That moment would come. Everything Malik Darnell did was timed precision, not impulse. Suddenly, the intercom crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be reaching cruising altitude shortly. Cabin service will begin momentarily." Malik's eyes flicked to the fastened seatbelt sign above. Still glowing. He tightened his strap, not out of necessity, but for optics. Everything was being documented. Even the absurdity of securing oneself to a folding chair in first class. Let the world see. Let them judge. From behind him, he heard the crew resume their chatter, lighthearted, careless. The young steward who had carried the chair laughed again. "Still can't believe he took it," he muttered. "Probably thinks he's proving a point or something." The older attendant replied, chuckling. "They always do. No matter how much money they have, they want to feel important." Malik didn't react, but the tablet recorded it all. They weren't mocking a mistake. They were exposing a mindset. From a systems level, Malik understood the value of triggers, the moment something small reveals something systemic. This wasn't just one bad decision. This was the rot underneath the polish, and Malik was preparing to disinfect it with sunlight. As the flight settled into its smooth glide over the clouds, Malik remained on the folding chair, still composed, still watching, still documenting. The crew believed he had been silenced with a plastic seat and salted peanuts. They had no idea they had just given him the weapon he needed. The only question now was when to pull the trigger. The hum of the engines was a near-constant lullaby in the background, broken only by the subtle clinks of silverware and murmurs of curated conversation. The cabin crew floated between aisles like trained ghosts, smiling at passengers pouring champagne, presenting hors d'oeuvres, everything choreographed, everything spotless. Except one thing, the folding chair. It sat like an open wound in the middle of perfection, awkward, incongruous, a stark contrast to the manicured luxury that surrounded it. And Malik Darnell, seated upon it, had become the living embodiment of the airline's blind spot. But he wasn't just sitting, he was dissecting. With every passing minute, his tablet logged not just video, but data voice recordings, timestamps, facial recognition, flags from the crew, and proximity metrics. The flight's internal network meant for onboard communications and media had already been quietly accessed by Malik's device. He was inside the system now, watching what they said, how they moved, what files were transmitted. And what he found was worse than negligence. It was policy. In a hidden folder buried inside the crew's internal operating dashboard, Malik uncovered a subroutine labeled Priority Conflict Protocols. The file wasn't overtly racist or discriminatory. It didn't need to be. It was cloaked in legal ambiguity. Phrases like reallocate based on aesthetic cohesion and profile harmonization protocols were scattered throughout. Aesthetic cohesion, profile harmonization. The euphemisms hit harder than slurs. Malik's expression remained calm, but a slow burn grew in his chest. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a design tolerance and architecture built to maintain comfort zones for the kind of passengers who preferred not to see people like him in first class. The protocol had multiple triggers, mismatches between passenger appearance and recorded titles, visual irregularities compared to first-class style baselines, and most damning, a secondary reassignment guideline when customer optics were at risk. They had downgraded him not because of an error, but because he disrupted the illusion. And now he had proof. He tapped twice on the screen and sent a secure zip file to his ethics officer. The subject line was simple: systemic bias confirmed. Code Harkness triggered. Troy responded within seconds. Received. Composing dossier, ethics counsel notified. Cross-checking with previous flagged incidents from Skyjet. Will request their crew database. Need names. Malik typed back, I'll give you names. And he would, one by one. He opened a secondary window. It was an HR compliance interface built for Onyx Tech's executive auditing system. Though it was designed for use within his own company, it had cross-functionality with airlines thanks to shared tech infrastructure. As a registered compliance consultant, he had back-end privileges they never anticipated he'd use not as a passenger. He typed the name from the flight manifest, Randall Clay, lead attendant. The system pinged back his employment profile, 6 years with Skyjet 2 internal citations, and one flagged but dismissed complaint regarding selective courtesy prioritization. Malik knew what that meant. He scrolled further. Assistant crew Daniel Murtaugh, junior staff. No complaints. First year of service. Possibly redeemable. He kept scrolling. 2 more names. One associated with an upgrade reassignment 3 weeks prior that displaced a South Asian professor who had quietly filed a grievance and then withdrew it. Malik flagged that file too. A pattern was emerging. They hadn't targeted him because he was Malik Darnell. They had targeted him because of what he looked like before they realized who he was. And now the system was about to pay for its blindness. He closed the profile tabs and opened his command prompt. Initiate internal protocol network sync plus visual corroboration. Every glance, every interaction, every denial. It was now mapped in a clean exportable sequence cause-effect system response. As the flight attendants returned for final meal service, Malik watched them. Randall, the lead, passed him without a glance, without so much as an offer of water. Daniel, the junior, hesitated but kept walking. That hesitation was important. It meant guilt hadn't yet hardened into apathy. In front of him, the woman in seat 2A leaned to whisper to her partner, I think something's happening. Her voice was soft, but her eyes weren't. Passengers were beginning to notice. And that meant the narrative was shifting. Malik unlocked a final protocol on his tablet, Skyview Public Access, delayed stream, He'd planned this contingency years ago for whistleblower protection, but now he was about to use it for something else. A soft icon appeared. Activate delayed public release T, 0045 year 0. He tapped yes. 45 minutes from now, the stream would go live. Not to the world, just to a few hundred journalists or journalist thought, leaders, equity advocates, and regulators on his internal list. People who didn't need drama to act, just proof. And Malik had given them all the proof they needed. He leaned back against the metal chair. It creaked slightly beneath his weight, still cold, still offensive. But now it was also an altar. Upon it, Malik Darnell was building the case that would bring down a facade dressed as service, and in its place force an industry to see. At 37,000 feet, the illusion of hierarchy held by threadbare rituals, champagne and stemware four-course meals on tray tables, and the polite tyranny of silence began to unravel. It started small. A steward, pale with uncertainty, dropped a bottle of sparkling water as he passed through the first-class cabin. It rolled down the aisle and tapped Malik Darnell's shoe. He didn't flinch. Instead, he picked it up, turned it in his palm, and placed it calmly on the tray beside him, the same tray where he had earlier been served peanuts, like a courtesy for surviving insult. But others were starting to flinch. Across the aisle seat 2B, a marketing executive named Lila Chan looked up from her laptop. She had been pretending not to notice since the beginning, just another passive observer to injustice. But now she couldn't stop watching him. The way he sat spine straight on a metal chair in a cabin where even pillows were custom stitched. The way he typed. The fact that he hadn't raised his voice once. She nudged her colleague beside her. "He's not staff," she whispered. "He's someone." "Then why is he on that?" the man replied, glancing nervously at the folding chair. "PR stunt, no." Lila said, her voice lower. "This isn't a stunt. This is precision." The murmurs began to ripple. From row 3, a teenager in headphones scrolling through TikTok offline looked up and recognized the man from a startup profile he'd read last month. Malik Darnell, founder of Onyx Tech, advocate of Dignity AI. He snapped a photo discreetly. A single grainy image, Malik on the chair backlit by cabin lights, with a silver tray of untouched peanuts beside him. It uploaded the moment the plane hit a signal pocket. Plastic chair flight and dignity in first class. Within minutes, the photo hit private aviation forums and trickled into niche equity networks. Influencers didn't know what they were seeing, but they knew it meant something. Back on board, the transformation was happening in real time. Flight attendant Daniel Murtaugh returned to the galley with visible tension in his shoulders. He had seen the notification on the overhead screen, route altered. Corsam Emergency Airfield, ETA 28 Minaman. He leaned into the galley panel, pressing the intercom override. "Randall," he whispered to the lead attendant, "they're diverting." Randall's jaw clenched. "You don't know that." Daniel swallowed. I think it's him. The guy in the chair." I looked him up. Randall scoffed, but the break in his posture betrayed him. In row 1, a quiet grandmother named Esther Powell glanced from her paperback novel to the folding chair. She remembered Birmingham. She remembered Woolworth's lunch counters. She closed her book slowly and reached into her handbag, not for a camera, not for drama, but for a pen. On the back of her boarding pass, she began to write what she saw. 2 seats back, a finance VP who had chuckled earlier now sat frozen. Not because he feared scandal, but because he realized something far more dangerous was happening. Power, the kind they couldn't contain, was about to change hands. Malik watched all of it in peripheral silence. Not the panic, not the regret, the awakening. His screen flashed again, T002114 until broadcast begins. He unlocked a sidebar window on his tablet and quietly began compiling the full incident log. Not just audio, not just footage, but behavioral telemetry, a real-time neural net scan of crew response patterns taken from the Onyx biometric node embedded in his watch. Their micro-expressions, heart rates, speech cadence, all of it matched to known indicators of bias under professional pressure. He would make this useful not just to make a point, but to train the future out of these errors. "Sir," a soft voice. He looked up. It was Daniel. The junior attendant stood there awkwardly. Something in his eyes different this time. No smugness, no protocol, just a man caught between what he was told and what he now saw. I just wanted to ask, would you like a meal?" Sir Malik blinked once, then tilted his head. You're asking, now Daniel nodded, swallowing. Why, Malik asked evenly. Daniel's voice cracked, but he didn't look away. Because I think we were wrong, and I can't undo that, but I don't want to keep doing it. Malik studied him for a long moment. The cabin had gone quiet. People were watching. This wasn't the apology. It wasn't even redemption. But it was something rare awakening. Bring me the same tray they gave 1A, Malik said. Daniel nodded, then turned to go. Malik added softly, and Daniel, he paused, turning back. Keep your head up, Malik said. Shame should belong to systems, not to those waking up inside them. Daniel nodded again, this time with a quiet kind of pride. In the corner of his tablet, the countdown continued, 001702. And for the first time on this flight, Malik Darnell smiled not with triumph, but with purpose. The storm had started, but so had the awakening. The flight was 30 minutes from Corsom Airfield. Passengers had settled into a strange silence, not quite calm, not quite alarmed. The clinking of cutlery had slowed. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the seasoned frequent flyers in bespoke suits now sat with an unfamiliar unease. No one quite knew what was happening, but everyone felt it. Malik Darnell remained on the folding chair near the galley wall, his posture unchanged, but everything around him had shifted. Daniel, the junior flight attendant, returned with a tray. A proper tray. Filet of beef, herbed potatoes, steamed asparagus, a warm roll, real silver cutlery. It was identical to what had been served to the passenger in seat 1A. He placed it in front of Malik with trembling hands. I brought you the same meal, he said quietly. Malik looked up slowly. You already offered an apology, he said. This is something more. Daniel nodded. It's a correction. Malik didn't smile, but he offered a quiet nod of acknowledgement, a gesture not of forgiveness, but of recognition. Passengers watched. Some stared outright. Others tried to look away but couldn't. It wasn't the tray that stunned them. It was the shift in power that was now visibly underway. A man seated on a folding chair eating from the same service as the elite without raising his voice, without forcing his way in, had become the center of the cabin's gravity. He hadn't demanded respect, he had recalibrated it. And now the evidence of that shift was unfolding with precision. Back at Onyx Tech's operations hub in Darvane City, crisis protocol was accelerating. Troy Gordon stood at the center of the floor-length screen wall as notifications surged across the command dashboard. Clause 17F confirmed by Corsom. FAA feed linked. Secondary legal team prepped, said Kendra Lynn, Chief Compliance Officer. Social telemetry shows spike in engagement. Hashtags trending in 11 regions. What's the forecast, Troy asked. Market's nervous, Kendra replied. Skyjet stock dropped 8% in the last hour. Whispers of shareholder revolt. CEO hasn't issued a statement. Yet. Troy tapped the encrypted call button on his tablet and patched through to the satellite feed. Malik appeared on screen, seated calmly on the maintenance chair, cutting his filet with meticulous quiet. You're live to Central, Troy said. Malik didn't look at the camera. Begin escalation, he said, but softly. No fire, just pressure. Troy understood instantly. This wouldn't be a public outcry. This would be surgical leverage. Activate the advisory letters, Malik continued. To all Skyjet board members, let them know their quarterly audit package has been modified. Attach the crew compliance log, done, Troy said. And the statement, hold it. Malik lifted the glass of red wine now beside his tray. A Bordeaux from Chateau Lagrange, 1999. The exact vintage listed on Skyjet's elite service menu. He took a sip, calm and steady, then set the glass down gently. There's something more effective than exposing humiliation, he said. It's documenting the system that created it. He opened his tablet, navigated to a live dashboard labeled Project Meridian, and unlocked the internal AI diagnostic he had authored 5 years ago, a dormant module designed to track human decision-making under biased conditions. He had used it to train hiring protocols to eliminate systemic discrimination in autonomous AI systems. Now, for the first time, he was using it on people. With a few taps, he linked the footage crew audio logs and flight manifest metadata into the bias detection pipeline. An alert blinked on screen. Preliminary pattern detected, escalation index 7.3, unjustified downgrade, based on visual discrepancy. Malik tapped twice to approve the dataset for distribution to the Aviation Oversight Board's Ethics Review Committee. This wasn't just retaliation, it was proof. Back in the cockpit, the pilots were reviewing the diverted flight plan. Korsam Airfield was less than 150 miles out now. The lead pilot, Captain Rohr, adjusted his collar and reached for the intercom again. But before he could speak, a soft chime echoed from the control panel. A message had arrived. Private Compliance Authority audit logged by external oversight. Malik's actions were already triggering cross-agency scrutiny. Not by threats, but by embedded policy. He had used the system against itself, weaponized not emotion, but documentation. In row 2, Lila Chan pulled up the airline's app and tried to look up the flight manifest. It was locked, restricted, but someone in row 4 was quicker. They had found Malik's LinkedIn. The credentials weren't just impressive, they were intimidating. DARPA Advisory Board, Onyx Tech founder, lead architect of the Dignity Protocol standard being adopted across EU aviation councils. And here he was eating steak from a tray balanced on a folding chair. The realization spread like wildfire. He wasn't the outlier. He was the authority. In the rear galley, Daniel watched it unfold in slow motion, the looks of recognition, the buzz of realization, the moment where social hierarchy failed to keep up with truth. He whispered to the crew member beside him, "We messed with the wrong man." But Malik wasn't vengeful. He was methodical. He took one more bite of the steak and closed his tray. Then calmly he opened a secure group chat labeled Meridian Implementation, Skyjet Partnership, tentative, and typed only 3 words, "Ready the blueprint." Because this wasn't just about a chair. This was about building something new, out of every silent injustice ever swallowed. And Malik Darnell. He was already 5 moves ahead. As Flight JX-921 glided toward Korsam Airfield, a different kind of turbulence rippled through the industry's back channels. What had begun as a quiet humiliation was now a full-scale compliance crisis escalating in real time, not with panic, but with precise surgical exposure. At 38,000 feet, Malik Darnell remained composed. The folding chair beneath him creaked softly as he shifted, not from discomfort, but to retrieve the matte black dossier now balanced atop his lap. Inside, tucked between layers of thermal shielded fabric, was a slim USB drive, unassuming to most, but to aviation analysts, it represented the future of oversight. It was his original draft of the Passenger Dignity Protocol, a regulatory framework rejected 3 years ago by Skyjet's leadership on the grounds that it was costly, overreaching, and not scalable. Now they would have no choice. Malik tapped into his device, sent the file tag Dignity Clause V1. 3 to 3 nodes, Onyx Tech's legal team, the Aviation Oversight Board's EU subcommittee, and an independent journalist he trusted from CNR Global. Not all power moved through shareholders. Some moved through timing, and Malik's was perfect. Back on the ground, the pressure intensified. Skyjet's internal Slack channels buzzed like hornet nests. Compliance teams flagged the passenger manifest as incomplete. Legal received a live-streamed incident report from the cockpit, but by the time they realized the name Malik Darnell matched the same individual who held a controlling interest in 3 international aerospace AI patents, they were too late. The pilots had already initiated emergency diversion, but the Yarat went deeper. Inside Skyjet's New York headquarters, a crisis meeting was underway. At the center was Meredith Hales, Skyjet's global risk officer. Her eyes scanned the compliance report as it updated line by line. "Who approved the override?" she asked flatly. No one answered. She slammed the report down. "This isn't a complaint from a minor celebrity. This is a structural compliance violation against the author of the cargo clause itself." The boardroom went silent. They knew the name, but they hadn't understood the reach. Until now. Meanwhile, inside the aircraft, the facade of luxury had begun to splinter. Malik could feel it. Not an outburst, but in the absence of confidence. The crew's choreography had failed. The power imbalance had reversed. Passengers whispered. Some glanced apologetically. Others kept quiet, unsure whether to distance themselves or align. From the galley, flight attendant Blake Vinton emerged pale-faced and stiff-jawed. He carried a new tray identical to the earlier first-class sets, but held it differently now, not as a performance, but as restitution. He stopped beside Malik. "Sir," he began, "this was a mistake. I want you to know that wasn't protocol." Malik looked up from his tablet without emotion. "Which part?" he asked softly. Blake froze. "The chair. The downgraded seat. Or the assumption that I wouldn't notice Blake didn't answer. He placed the tray down, hands trembling slightly, then stepped back. Malik didn't touch the tray. Instead, he turned his attention to the screen again, where a series of compiled crew transcripts now displayed clear patterns of microaggressions across other Skyjet flights, data points his legal team had pulled from the airline's own internal training audits. Three consistent themes emerged. 1. Upgrade denial based on appearance. You minimize complaint logging. No escalation when accused of bias. He smiled slightly. The system wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as designed. And that design had just been caught in the act. Elsewhere on the plane, the first signs of institutional panic emerged. A crew member whispered to the co-pilot in the cockpit, handing over a tablet containing live reports from Korsam's airfield. Media vans are arriving, he muttered, and federal compliance liaisons. They're not treating this like a misunderstanding anymore. The pilot nodded grimly. This is going to court, he said. But Malik wasn't seeking a courtroom. He was orchestrating a case study, one that couldn't be ignored, dismissed, or erased. He opened the final folder on his tablet titled Culture Audit, Phase 1, Skyjet Internal Behavior Model. It listed every employee associated with the incident, names, positions, timestamps, and behavioral flags logged by his team's passive audio analytics suite. It was indisputable. The pattern of selective enforcement, subtle dismissal, and performative professionalism. They hadn't just mistreated a passenger. They had exposed their culture. And Malik, with a calm hand and a clear mandate, was going to make sure that exposure rewrote the rules for every airline watching. He leaned back in the maintenance chair, spine straight, gaze steady, and began drafting his next message. To Civil Aviation Board, subject recommendation for Passenger Bill of Rights, SECURN. 4. Expansion draft. Include clause preventing discretionary reassignment of paying passengers from secured seating unless a mechanical or security threat is proven. No staff-based judgment shall override manifest compliance. Infractions will result in route penalties and audit suspensions. He didn't need to argue. He was laying down law, one clause at a time. The wheels screeched as Flight JX921 touched down on Korsam Airfield, an emergency landing triggered not by weather nor by mechanical failure, but by a deeper malfunction, moral negligence. As the aircraft rolled toward the cordoned tarmac, passengers stared through the small oval windows at a scene unlike any they'd expected. Rows of black SUV security personnel in dark uniforms and media vans with satellite dishes lined the private perimeter. This wasn't just a stopover. It was a reckoning. Inside the cabin, tension crackled. Malik Darnell remained seated in the fold-out chair, back upright, hands folded in his lap, the picture of composure amid a system unraveling. He had said nothing, no outbursts, no threats, only silence, and silence was proving louder than any shouted demand. That silence now echoed in the minds of the very passengers who had watched, smirked, and said nothing. Row 3, seat D. A middle-aged investment banker named Arlen Beck sat rigid, arms crossed, jaw tight. He had seen it all. The folding chair, the refusal of service, the condescension, and like many others, had chosen indifference. But now, as he looked across the aisle at Malik, framed by flashing blue lights on the tarmac, a gnawing feeling gripped his gut. He had grown wealthy identifying patterns, and today he had just witnessed one fail in real time. Across the aisle in seat 3C, a retired judge named Helena Rourke tightened her grip on her cane. Her career had been defined by nuance, by distinguishing intent from error. But watching Malik, a paying passenger, a black executive, placed in a collapsible chair like excess luggage, had shifted something inside her. Not just legal alarm bells, but a sense of moral bankruptcy. This wasn't a mistake, she murmured under her breath. It was a message. At the front, the lead flight attendant, Randall Clay, had been summoned to the cockpit. But he didn't move. His A-network error occurred. Please check your connection and try again. If this issue persists, please contact us through our help center at help.openai.com. The moment the aircraft's engines quieted to a whisper, Malik Darnell rose not in defiance but in precision. He reached down for his briefcase and removed a slim black folder, the kind lined with RFID shielding and biometric locks. With a thumb press, it opened, revealing several neatly clipped documents, each labeled with coded markers, timestamps, and audio indexes. He handed it to the Aviation Regulatory Board inspector without fanfare. "This is your record of what happened on board," he said calmly, his voice as level as ever. "Every second, every word. The inspector nodded without speaking. He didn't need to ask if the information was admissible. The watermark on each page bore the seal of Onyx Tech's legal division, legally vetted and compliance locked. Outside, a second team of investigators had arrived. Their presence wasn't simply for show. One of them began scanning the underbelly of the aircraft, another took photos of the galley area, and a third quietly inspected the folding maintenance chair that had become the catalyst for a global embarrassment. The crew stood awkwardly, shoulder to shoulder in a forced line. Clay, the lead attendant, looked like he wanted to disappear. But inside the cabin, it was the passengers who now shifted uncomfortably, not from turbulence, but from recognition. Arlen Beck stood slowly and approached one of the compliance officers. "I need to report what I witnessed," he said. "I stayed silent, but I saw it all." His voice trembled with the edge of regret. Helena Rourke followed. "I can confirm the events in the tone used by the flight attendants." The phrase "people like that" was used repeatedly. More voices joined, a software executive in row 5, a professor traveling to a symposium in seat 6B. The murmurs of agreement became confessions. What had once been silent complicity now became reluctant testimony. Witnesses awakened by consequence. The compliance officer raised a brow. "We'll need statements. Full names." "You'll have them," Helena said. "In writing." In the rear of the plane, Carl, the young attendant who had physically placed the folding chair, sat quietly, head in hands. He hadn't spoken since landing. His hands trembled as he pulled out his tablet and began typing. A private message. An apology. But it wasn't for the airline. It was for Malik. Meanwhile, Malik stood near the emergency exit, speaking directly with the federal transportation official who had boarded moments earlier. "This isn't about bad service," he said. "This is about a culture. A protocol of humiliation that's been coded into passenger profiling under the radar but deeply embedded." The official listened solemn. "Mr. Darnell will open an investigation. This will be reviewed at the congressional oversight level." "Good," Malik replied, "because what happens here won't stay in a folder. It becomes precedent." Down on the tarmac, news cameras began rolling. Malik didn't flinch. His silence had spoken. Now the evidence would. The sun was setting over Durane City, casting amber reflections across the chrome and glass skyline. Inside Onyx Tower, Malik Darnell stood alone before a massive digital display in his executive suite, his figure a silhouette against the golden wash of light pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows. Behind him, the quiet hum of the city mirrored the silent reckoning still unfolding thousands of miles away on a grounded airstrip. The screen showed the final signatures. Skyjet Airlines had agreed to every term: an internal ethics overhaul, a restructuring of their first-class passenger protocol, a mandated inclusion council with rotating external members, and above all, an unconditional public apology, naming not only the crew, but the systemic decisions that allowed humiliation to occur in the first place. But Malik didn't smile. He hadn't won. He had exposed. That distinction mattered. He sipped his tea herbal, the same blend he'd been denied aboard, and watched as his company's AI system flagged hundreds of supportive messages pouring in from across the globe. Not just from CEOs or policymakers, but from the overlooked, the frequent flyers never seen, the employees dismissed for not looking the part, the kids in tech boot camps he once funded who now messaged, "We saw what you did, we won't forget." He closed the file, turned off the screen, and walked to the edge of the glass wall. This was never about revenge. It was about legacy. In the seat where a plastic chair once stood, he'd built a blueprint for change. One built not with rage, but resolve. One that whispered to the world, dignity is not optional. It is non-negotiable. The next morning, the world was watching. News tickers scrolled across global broadcast networks. CEO grounds flight after discrimination. Folding chair sparks industry reckoning. Who is Malik Darnell? Social feeds overflowed with commentary, not just from influencers and journalists, but from airline workers, business leaders, flight attendants, and everyday passengers recounting their own silent humiliations. The viral image, Malik seated in a cold foldable galley chair, blazer immaculate, gaze calm, had become a symbol unshakable. But far away from the media storm, inside a marble-tiled executive boardroom at the Cordavia Aviation Regulatory Bureau, a very different storm was brewing. 12 directors, each representing a different pillar of international flight compliance, sat in silence around a long, arched table. At the head sat director Lena Morgan, silver-haired, steel-eyed, and visibly unsettled. In front of her was a thin black dossier titled Clause 17F Activation Report, Flight JX921. This, she said flatly, lifting the document without looking up, wasn't a stunt. Her voice cut through the air like a razor. The others looked uneasy. It wasn't a publicity grab. It wasn't a rogue contractor exploiting protocol. It was a test we failed. Across from her, Director Jules Banerjee leaned forward, brows knit. He used the clause exactly as designed. Identified a safety violation. Requested compliance. Initiated emergency descent. And most damning of all, he was legally and morally right. Lena nodded once slowly. That chair should have never touched the floor. The room fell into a dense silence. What Malik had triggered was more than just a flight diversion. It was the first civilian activation of a rare legal override meant for catastrophic conditions, cargo misplaced fire risk, crew incapacitation. Yet here it was invoked by a man denied a seat placed into storage seating, unfit for animals, let alone a federal cleared contractor. Director Miles Herrera, a former air marshal, finally spoke. We've received 5 inquiries in the last 18 hours, other passengers asking if they too can invoke this clause. One man claimed he was told to sit near the toilet on an international flight due to an overbooking error. Jules Banerjee added, so did we open a door, or did we finally realize it was always cracked and no one dared to walk through it until now? That question lingered like smoke. At that very moment in a classroom 2 floors below, aviation law students gathered in hushed tones. Their professor, a stern woman with clipped speech and tailored suits, had projected the JX921 incident as that day's case study. Darnell didn't break the rules, she said. He revealed them. Meanwhile, in a hotel suite in Brussels, Skyjet's interim CEO Celeste Harrington paced in front of her communications team. They had just finalized the press release, the language carefully crafted not to admit fault, yet not to appear evasive. It was a performance carefully staged, but she knew something deeper had shifted. What happens if more people do this, one PR strategist asked? If they all stand up mid-flight and say, I won't be treated like this? Celeste stopped pacing. Then we change, she said, or we don't fly at all. That afternoon, Malik Darnell stepped into a nondescript elevator deep in the Onyx Tech headquarters. Troy was waiting inside, tablet in hand. Media summit set for Friday. Ethics Council requested an early draft of your keynote. Malik nodded. Did we confirm attendance from the other airlines, all but one? Skyjet sending their COO instead of the CEO. A pause. Malik exhaled, not with disappointment, but understanding. They're still surviving, he said, not transforming. The elevator opened into the subterranean command suite, walls of glass screens displaying international air routes, legal alerts, press activity, even sentiment analysis dashboards. One screen blinked red. Another video, Troy said. Passenger on a domestic carrier in the U.S. recorded a steward shaming a disabled woman for pre-boarding. Malik tapped the screen, watched in silence, then said quietly, add it to the archive. Catalog under Pattern E, the machine of change had begun. And Malik wasn't just responding anymore. He was mapping a network of systemic failure, intending to dismantle it from the inside, connection by connection, until it collapsed on its own lies. Because this was never about a chair. It was about how power humiliated quietly and how dignity fought back even quieter. Ready for the next step, Troy asked. Malik didn't flinch. Start the audit. The audit began not with headlines, but with silence. Inside Skyjet's operations center, an immaculate space of glass partitions, soft fluorescent lighting, and carefully manicured calm, a team of internal analysts stared at a private portal marked Passenger Equity Audit. Priority red. The directive had come not from the marketing team, not from Mars, but from the Aviation Regulatory Bureau itself, backed by the Onyx Tech Ethics Division. They were told plainly, you are not searching for broken policies. You're searching for patterns of quiet harm. The first data set passenger seating assignments from the last 18 months. The filters weren't just by name or class. They were by ethnicity markers, upgrade rejections, service complaints, tagged attitude, mud, and most chillingly, who was offered champagne in first class and who wasn't. And the pattern screamed. Passengers with West African surnames were 36% more likely to be reassigned from premium to economy when flights were overbooked. Passengers flagged as sensitive were disproportionately labeled that way after complaints about tone, not service. And in one chilling trend, 73% of complaints from Black travelers were closed with the tag perception mismatch, not misconduct. The same phrase had been attached to Malik's complaint years ago, long before JX921. In a separate room, a smaller team had been tasked with reviewing crew messaging logs. Normally off limits, these logs included internal comms during flights, messages exchanged via cabin chat used mostly for operations. But they told a second story. Flight 102B, passenger 14C, flagged too loud, looks like another activist type. Watch her, Flight 117A, row 3 asking for wine again. Let's delay. She's in leggings, probably snuck up from coach. Flight 921 folding chair held per F1's request. Guy had Onyx badge, bet he's a drama case. Every message was time-stamped. Every message linked to names. And for the first time, those names were being cross-referenced with actual faces. But the most damning discovery came not from the records, but from the stories that began surfacing once people realized someone was listening. In the week following the JX921 incident, more than 4,000 emails flooded into the new Onyx tech-backed Passenger Dignity Initiative inbox. Some were brief, others were pages long, but each carried the weight of years of microaggressions, neglect, and systemic profiling hidden behind smiles and airline policies. A retired teacher who had been moved mid-flight because her seat was mistakenly assigned to a donor guest. A pediatric nurse returning from Haiti who had to wait in the galley for a meal that never arrived. A teenage debate champion seated near the rear toilet despite a confirmed first-class booking. Her photo and braces in a Princeton sweatshirt was now on the same monitor Troy kept open beside Malik's desk. Back at Onyx HQ, the data fed into a living archive, a map not of incidents, but of rot. Malik Darnell stood in the war room, now surrounded by LED walls, each pulsing with real-time reports. Troy had expanded the monitoring system. Now every major airline sentiment tracker flashed in red, yellow, or green, depending on public perception that day. Skyjet was solid red. Troy pointed to the upper left corner. We've run over 15,000 keyword associations across global social media. The most common words attached to your name are now dignity, strategy, and folding chair. Malik raised an eyebrow. We're rebranding humiliation. No, Troy said, you're redefining leverage. They weren't just building a movement. They were building infrastructure. In the center of the room, a new project file had gone live, Phase 2, the Passenger Standard Index. A public-facing scorecard updated monthly grading airlines on dignity bias training and complaint resolution. But this wasn't fluff. Malik was backing it with metrics: average wait times by ethnicity, resolution times for complaints by gender, in-flight seating fairness. And it was launching globally. Later that evening, as the lights dimmed over the Durrani skyline, Malik sat alone in the rooftop glass observatory of Onyx Tower. The folding chair stood beside him, encased in a glass display. Not as a trophy, but as evidence. He didn't need a podium, he didn't need a press badge, he just needed truth. Sharpened, documented, weaponized. And he knew exactly where to aim it next. Prepare to brief the oversight committees, he told Troy, who entered quietly with a tablet. Then get me every name behind those tags, perception mismatch, not misconduct. I want to meet the gatekeepers. The war for reform wasn't loud, it was surgical, and Malik had just cut through the skin. At precisely 900 a.m., the next morning, the marble-floored conference room inside the Credavia Aviation Oversight Bureau lit up wall-to-wall LED panels, illuminating data projections across a 30-foot digital canvas. Malik Darnell entered in silence, his presence shifting the atmosphere before a word was spoken. The room was filled with the industry's most influential power brokers, regulatory officers from 5 countries, legal advisors, transportation ministers, and 2 delegates from the United Nations Committee on Ethical Infrastructure. At the center of the room sat an unassuming tablet propped upright on a metal stand. On its screen was a simple icon: PSI Live, Passenger Standard Index. It was time to show them what systemic reform actually looked like. Gentlemen, ladies, Malik began, his voice measured but without pleasantries. We've spent decades perfecting logistics, comfort, even luxury. But we've ignored the most basic expectation passengers carry with them on every flight: to be treated with dignity. The room fell still. Today we change that. With a motion toward the screen, Troy tapped the tablet, and the passenger's standard index came alive. It displayed a global airline leaderboard, an uncompromising scorecard ranking carriers on 6 criteria: equity and seating assignments, bias-related complaint resolution, cultural sensitivity training completion, upgrade discretion patterns, in-flight service disparities, anonymous passenger respect ratings. Skyjet appeared 134th out of 137. 3 red flags glowed beside its name. Each metric is public, Malik explained. Updated monthly, data verified, no editing, no lobbying. The public will finally see what's long been hidden behind platinum lounges and polished mission statements. A murmur swept through the room. One executive leaned forward. But what authority do you have to enforce this? Malik didn't blink. I don't enforce. The public does. I give them the scoreboard. They choose where to spend their money. Troy stepped forward. Since the JX921 incident, Skyjet has lost 14% of its premium ticket sales. Their investor confidence index dropped by 21%. We didn't pull a lever. The market did. Another board member, this one from the European Transit Commission, shifted uncomfortably. You're telling us that a single seat, no, Malik cut in his tone, sharpening like cold steel. I'm telling you that a single pattern disguised as a single seat was enough. Because it happened 1,000 times before. I just caught it live. He moved to the side of the screen and brought up a heat map of complaint activity across 28 countries. Red zones pulsed in every major air hub. Passengers have been documenting these patterns for years. They just didn't know where to send the proof. Now they do. At the far end of the room, a representative from the African Aviation Union, an older woman in a burgundy suit, spoke for the first time. And what's your end game, Mr. Darnell? Malik turned toward her. A global dignity protocol, he said. Binding, auditable, enforceable, with financial consequences for failure. The silence that followed wasn't out of disbelief. It was fear. Not of chaos, but of order they could no longer control. Behind him, the PSI dashboard transitioned to a short clip from JX921. No commentary, just footage of the folding chair. The captain's voice announcing an emergency landing. The moment Malik stood silent, composed, refusing to return hate with anger. And then the tagline appeared, respect isn't elite, it's essential. The room exhaled like a chamber depressurizing. Even the skeptics couldn't deny it now. This wasn't a PR campaign, it was a movement with teeth. Within minutes, commitments began rolling in. Canada's Civil Aviation Authority pledged to adopt PSI standards by year's end. Singapore's delegation requested integration support for their 5 major terminals. And by noon, the European Union had called an emergency session to review their own passenger protection laws, citing PSI as a structural accountability model. But not everyone was clapping. 2 US-based airline consortium reps approached Troy privately during the break. You're weaponizing shame, one accused. Troy didn't flinch. We're illuminating truth. If that feels like shame, maybe you need to rethink your seating policies. Back at Onyx HQ, Malik returned to his office just after 3:00 p.m. The skyline of Dorene shimmered behind him as he reviewed incoming press coverage. Already outlets were declaring PSI a disruptive framework that could redefine accountability in transit services. But there was still one more message to send. He picked up his phone and called Troy. Send the first briefing packet to the airport procurement departments, Malik said. Include our compliance evaluation toolkit. You're starting phase 3, Troy asked. No, Malik replied. I'm starting competition. A pause. We're not just auditing old systems anymore, he continued. We're building new ones. Because Malik didn't just want to change the game. He wanted to own the playing field. Hours after the PSI rollout made headlines, the ripple effect was already slamming into airport boardrooms and corporate strategy teams like an unanticipated storm surge. In cities across the globe, Hong Kong, London, Atlanta, Johannesburg executives scrambled to determine what PSI meant for their quarterly targets, compliance goals, and PR liabilities. But at Onyx Tech's Dorane City headquarters, Malik Darnell had already moved 3 steps ahead. Inside a secured conference suite, Malik stood before a digital wall that displayed live passenger sentiment data. Each continent lit up in colors: blue for approval, orange for neutrality, red for backlash. The data pulsed in real time, drawn from social media news articles, Even feedback from airline loyalty apps now scraping PSI link discussions. Gentleman Malik began his voice low and precise. We're not here to win arguments. We're here to raise the floor. Seated before him was a task force of 12 diversity officers, data scientists, behavioral analysts, even a former UN diplomat. They were the architects of the next frontier, the Dignity Infrastructure Index, DII. Unlike PSI, which focused on service violations and bias patterns, the DII would go deeper, measuring how well airports, airlines, and transport systems embedded principles of fairness into their design training and executive leadership. It wasn't just about treating people right, it was about proving with data that you had built the structure to do so. Every time someone gets quietly skipped over for an upgrade because they don't look the part, Malik continued, every time an accent triggers extra screening, every time a steward ignores a row because it's full of people who don't look premium, the DII will show it. The presentation screen shifted to a map of 5 pilot airports: Atlanta, Hartsfield, Dubai, International Cape Town, International Tokyo Haneda, and Charles de Gaulle. These hubs would serve as the first test beds for DII integration. Each of these locations has volunteered access to anonymized staff behavior tracking, in-terminal treatment audits, and customer feedback integration synced directly to our AI learning loop, said Troy, who was now leading the operational rollout. One of the task force members, a gray-haired behavioral compliance expert, raised a hand. What are you planning to do with the results once you have them? Publish them, Malik replied, without redactions. A murmur swept the table. There was no precedent for this. Airlines had always guarded their internal training audits like state secrets. Exposing them even partially would provoke chaos and revolution, which of course was the point. As the meeting ended, Malik remained behind, staring out the window. Rain streaked down the glass, thin lines of distortion over the city lights. His thoughts drifted back to that folding chair, how a single quiet insult had cracked open the ceiling of an entire industry. But this wasn't about a single insult anymore. It was about every insult that had gone unnoticed because the target didn't have a camera, a platform, or the patience to endure humiliation for the sake of evidence. That afternoon, Troy entered again, his face pale but controlled. Sir, he said carefully, Skyjet just held a private shareholder meeting. They've suspended 3 executives, including Chief of Cabin Experience. But more importantly, they've offered us a buyout. Malik turned. What kind of buyout? They're proposing a strategic acquisition. 22% stake to Onyx in exchange for co-management of their passenger operations division. Silence. Then Malik asked the question no one else would dare. Are they asking to partner? Or to silence? Troy didn't answer. He didn't need to. Malik tapped his temple once with 2 fingers. Decline. But offer them this, they get 180 days to clean house using PSI and DII protocols. Full transparency. If they hit 90% compliance, I'll endorse their boardroom changes. And if they don't, Troy asked. They go to the bottom of the index. No ad campaigns, no spin, just facts. Troy nodded and left. Malik remained still for a moment, then walked across the room to a vault-like cabinet. Inside was a stack of letters unsent, handwritten over years, addressed to regulators, CEOs, and ministers who had never listened, never replied. He took one and ripped it in half. He no longer needed their permission. He had built his own authority, and this time the world was watching. By the time the PSI and DII had become trending acronyms on every major financial news ticker, Malik Darnell's next move was already underway. But this time the focus wasn't just on institutions. It was on individuals. Inside a sleek, subterranean wing of Onyx Tech's ethics division, Malik convened a meeting unlike any other. The room, long, windowless, fortified with biometric locks, housed what insiders quietly referred to as the archive. It was here that hundreds of anonymized reports had been collected. Personal stories submitted in confidence by passengers, whistleblowers, and even airline employees since the folding chair incident. The stories were harrowing in their consistency. Black engineers denied lounge access despite platinum status. Muslim mothers forced to discard baby formula under the guise of extra security. Indigenous elders ignored when requesting disability assistance. LGBTQ couples separated for seating balance. The variations differed, but the machinery behind the mistreatment was the same: invisible, systemic, and designed to self-preserve. Malik stood before the archive screen, a 40-foot digital scroll of curated injustices, and took a long, steady breath. Around him sat a newly formed tribunal of ethical design strategists, civil rights attorneys, a cognitive AI ethicist, and 3 former transportation ombudsmen. Their mission, the launch of a global pattern recognition task force, GPRT, an AI-powered observatory that wouldn't just record violations but predict them. The systems we're fighting, Malik said, his voice deliberate and cold, aren't broken. They're working exactly as intended. What we're doing now isn't fixing, we're replacing. He turned to face the wall again, which now displayed clusters of story threads interconnected with colored neural links. One story in particular blinked red. Case 0071B, a black woman PhD physicist forcibly removed from a priority boarding queue after a staffer claimed she must have walked into the wrong line. Her ID verified. Her ticket. First class. The reason for removal. A mix-up. Her name, Dr. Alana Reed. Where is she now? Malik asked, eyes narrowed. A legal assistant responded. We located her. She's a researcher at Vardem Institute. No lawsuits filed. She sent her experience anonymously, didn't want to lose future travel privileges. Malik shook his head slowly. That's exactly the problem. They believe existing access is the prize. That staying quiet keeps the doors open. They don't know the house was never built for them to walk through, only wait beside. He walked over to the central command console and tapped a sequence into the touchscreen. The GPRT's pilot interface lit up, overlaying predictive hotspots across global travel routes. Red nodes clustered around elite terminals in Zurich, Dubai, Atlanta, and Buenos Aires. These were not random. These are your theaters, Malik said to the team. You don't just report the fire, you predict where the spark will land, and you hold those who fan it accountable before it ignites. One of the data scientists, a soft-spoken analyst named Lena, leaned forward. We've already flagged 163 recurring employees whose actions match bias vectors. They're not rogue, they're patterned. Malik nodded. Then let's force transparency. The strategy was twofold. First, all flagged names scrubbed for legal safety would be submitted to airline HR departments under a new PSI-connected accountability without retaliation protocol, AWRP. Second, Onyx Tech would offer confidential legal coverage to any employee who reported retaliation for compliance with the new dignity standards. And if they refuse, asked the ethics officer. We escalate, Malik replied. To the press, to the board, to the markets. But Malik wasn't finished. That evening, he returned to his penthouse and sat in the soft light of his private study. He stared at a single envelope on the desk. Handwritten, no label, no return address. It had been slipped through Onyx Tech's mailroom with a courier tag. Inside was a photo, grainy black and white, of a man in a pilot's uniform. On the back, a message. He was the first to deny me boarding in 1984. I stayed silent. I shouldn't have. There was no name, just a date, April 3rd, 1984. Malik set the photo beside his tablet and opened a new document. At the top, he typed one word: inheritance. This wasn't just about the future anymore. It was about healing the past. Hours after Malik titled his document Inheritance, the phrase took on new meaning. Not just as a file, not just as an idea, but as the beginning of something far more profound, a cultural inheritance audit. A redefinition of how power, dignity, and access would be passed forward, not between board members and shareholders, but across generations, especially those that had been systematically shut out. At 6:43 a.m., Malik entered a restricted wing of the Onyx Tech AI lab, known internally as Echelon. A titanium-plated corridor led him through multiple retinal and biometric checks before he reached the nucleus, a 360-degree interface of sensory data, deep learning models, and digital case archives. The AI that ran it all was named Lark, an adaptive engine designed to map ethical disruption points across public infrastructure. But today, Lark wasn't running diagnostics on foreign election networks or aviation cyber vulnerabilities. Today, Lark was focused on memory. On Malik's command, Lark began to parse decades of private testimony and suppressed passenger feedback, not just from Malik's incident. From archives leaked, hidden, buried in HR settlements, or folded into performance review notes. The AI pieced together a map of generational trauma, each dot a spark, each line a pattern. Lark displayed the name Dr. Alana Reed again, But this time the screen split beside it with a new name, Yvonne Reed. Match found Larkin tone. Passenger complaint filed June 7, 1984. JFK to Heathrow. Passenger forcibly reseated. Complaint dismissed. Same surname. DNA profile suggests direct maternal relation. Grandmother. Malik inhaled sharply. 3 generations. Same story. He stood still, letting the weight of that moment settle over him. His anger wasn't theatrical. It wasn't even visible. It was silent, cold, focused, like a tide that had grown tired of asking the shore for space. That's when he made the call. Not to legal, not to PR, not even to Troy. He called Amara Shaw. Amara was a civil architect and tech historian, a fierce advocate, and the only person Malik trusted to carry the legacy of this movement beyond policy. Her work had quietly advised the humanitarian design charter that Malik used to build Onyx Tech's accessibility protocols. She didn't crave visibility. She craved permanence. She picked up on the first ring. Malik. Her voice was soft, cautious. It was early. I need you to help me create something, he said. Not a protest, not a policy, something enduring. He explained the concept. The Inheritance Initiative, a cross-sector blueprint, part digital library, part ethical, archive part, restorative justice project built to document every instance of public degradation reported by marginalized individuals across aviation, hospitality, and tech sectors since 1970. It would archive not just incidents, but outcomes. Who acted? Who failed? Who changed? Amara was quiet for a moment. This is a monument, she whispered. A living one. Exactly, Malik replied. And it can't belong to me. Over the next 72 hours, Malik diverted nearly 12% of Onyx Tech's philanthropic fund into the first phase of the Inheritance Initiative. The board protested, briefly. But when Malik unveiled the Heritage Impact Index, a new market metric that tracked ethical transparency and corporate dignity, compliance investors saw what he already knew. Empathy was becoming a currency. Within days, major airlines began contacting Troy for copies of the protocol. Universities reached out to offer digitization support. One African telecom giant offered to host the initiative's cloud infrastructure for free. But perhaps most importantly, survivors, passengers, staffers, maintenance workers began submitting their own stories. Some were decades old, others from just last week. Each one a wound that never healed. Each one a page in a new legacy. Meanwhile, back at Skyjet headquarters, a different scene unfolded. The company's internal Slack channels leaked. Screenshots showed senior flight personnel panicking over Malik's next steps. Executives were forwarding emails with subject lines like "Do not forward" and "Malik escalation, risk containment priority." A staff member even posted, "Is this going to be our Starbucks moment?" But what terrified them wasn't Malik's power. It was the fact that Malik hadn't said a single word to the media since landing at Corsom Airfield. No interviews, no speeches, no lawsuits, just silence. And it was deafening, because they knew it wasn't over. It was only the intermission. Elsewhere, a student newspaper in Ohio published a viral op-ed titled "The Folding Chair in the Sky." It drew parallels between Malik's experience and a long line of micro and macro aggressions endured by trailblazing Black professionals over the decades. The closing paragraph read, "It wasn't just a chair. It was a question. Will you sit in silence or stand for dignity?" Malik read it in his office that night, alone. He looked again at the black titanium card on his desk, the one linked to Onyx Tech's most powerful AI framework. He pressed his finger to the scanner. "Phase 2, he whispered. "Begin." The first press conference was unannounced. No stage, no red carpet, no pre-selected journalists. Just a high-resolution live stream from a modest hall inside the Onyx Tech campus with 2 chairs, 1 table, and a white backdrop that read in clean sans-serif letters, "The Inheritance Initiative power begins with memory." Malik didn't enter with entourage. He walked in alone wearing a charcoal suit with no lapel pin, no branding, no emblem of status, only a small folder in his left hand. He sat down, looked directly into the camera, and said, "I'm not here to speak for every passenger that's ever been disrespected. I'm here to speak to every system that let it happen." There was a silence that followed so precise, it could have been part of the design. Then he opened the folder and pulled out a single document, his grandmother's 1984 complaint from JFK Airport, stamped in red complaint unfounded. He laid it flat on the table. Her name was Yvonne Reed. They made her sit in the back row. After she paid in full for business class, she never told anyone. She thought it was just the way things were. Then he placed a printout beside it, the flight manifest from his own journey decades later. Seat 1A denied. Nothing changed until now. The stream reached over 1.2 million viewers in the first 9 minutes. And then it began. Malik unveiled the 4 pillars of the Inheritance Initiative 1. The Testimony Vault, a digital decentralized archive of passenger mistreatment cases from racial profiling to accessibility denials, cross-verified by AI pattern recognition and human ethics boards. 2. The Equity Barometer, an open-source score assigned to airlines, airports, and travel vendors, updating in real time based on live feedback and compliance behavior. 3. The Repayment Protocol, a non-financial form of justice. Corporations could nominate themselves for review, but any attempt to settle incidents with hush money would be publicly flagged. Apology was not accountability. Correction was. 4. The 7-seat doctrine, the most radical. A policy recommendation to the International Aviation Consortium mandating that on every flight one first-class seat be reserved as a monitoring benchmark for internal audit, for ethics transparency, and most importantly for precedent. Troy stood just out of frame watching the metrics spike. Advocacy groups from 5 countries began mirroring the live stream on their own platforms. Universities pledged research. A global translation project kicked off in real time. But none of that shook Skyjet like what happened next. Malik closed his remarks with 3 words. I forgive them. The words weren't dramatic. There was no trembling voice. But it shattered every narrative the airline had rehearsed. Because it made the issue no longer about revenge. It made it about culture. Later that evening, Skyjet's emergency PR committee held a closed-door session. The CEO sat red-faced at the head of the table, flanked by outside crisis consultants and 2 aviation lobbyists. A junior analyst slid a tablet across the table. Sir, you need to see this. It was a new viral video, not produced by Onyx Tech, but by a teenage creator on a video app. Split-screen footage of Malik sitting on the folding chair side by side with airline ads promising comfort and luxury. Soundtrack, Nina Simone's Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood. Caption, they gave him plastic. He gave us purpose. It had over 4 million views in an hour. Is he behind this, the CEO asked? No, the analyst said. This is organic. They had lost control of the narrative. But Malik didn't care about virality. He wasn't chasing headlines. At that exact moment, he was sitting with Amara in a small lab surrounded by rows of framed testimonials, handwritten letters, voice memos, uploaded video snippets. One read, they made me prove my wheelchair wasn't a security threat. Twice. Another, my son cried when they told us his oxygen tank was inconvenient. Amara turned to him. What do we do with these? Malik answered without pause. We build a hall. She frowned. You mean like a memorial? No, he said, like an archive. He stood, walked over to a whiteboard and sketched a circle. This isn't just about what happened. It's about showing the cycle. Who allowed it? Who stopped it? And who stayed silent? He wrote one word in the center: continuity. In the following 48 hours, 5 more airlines requested meetings with Onyx Tech's ethics board. A luxury hotel chain signed on to pilot a guest dignity protocol. A senator from California submitted a bill proposal inspired by the 7-seat doctrine. The change was no longer theoretical. It was system-wide. And yet Malik's face didn't appear on talk shows. He wasn't giving interviews. He wasn't tweeting. He was somewhere else quietly reviewing another set of documents. Not about flights, but about schools. Because dignity isn't just denied in the sky. And this, he knew, was only the beginning of his inheritance project. It began with a door frame, not a speech, not a launch event, just a steel archway erected at the edge of a construction site outside Durane City. The placard welded to its center bore 6 words, "The Hall of Untold Journeys coming soon." It wasn't flashy. There were no press cameras, no ribbon-cutting ceremony. But those who passed by, especially locals who knew the weight of Malik Darnell's name, paused. They took photos. They whispered. They speculated. The land had once belonged to a defunct private charter company ironically one with a long history of passenger mistreatment, lawsuits buried by settlements. Malik had bought it in full, not for real estate, but for remembrance. Inside Onyx Tech's planning division, the blueprints had already been finalized. The hall would not be a museum of outrage. It would be a map of patterns. A data-integrated, AI-curated space that visualized over 30 years of subtle discrimination in transit and hospitality, from denied upgrades to code-worded profiling embedded in logs. Troy stood at the scale model late into the evening, staring at the layered corridors designed like airport concourses. "You know this is going to change the entire industry," he said. Malik didn't answer immediately. He was holding a photograph, grainy black and white, from '91, his mother seated near the rear lavatory of a flight. Behind her, 3 rows of empty seats. "They changed the rules on her mid-flight," he said softly. "Told her a VIP had arrived and needed her seat." He placed the photo into a new file labeled Exhibit 1A. Above it, he wrote in pen, "Routine injustice is the most dangerous kind." Troy nodded. "We've already onboarded a team of civil engineers, data architects, even a scent designer. They want to simulate the smells of old terminals. Waiting rooms, metal trays. Don't make it nostalgic," Malik interrupted. "Make it accurate. Let people feel how small they were made to feel." Elsewhere, the ripple effects continued. Skyjet's board had officially approved the Darnell protocol, installing AI-assisted equity monitors into every aircraft compliance system. The irony wasn't lost on the press. The same tech Skyjet once doubted now protected them. Meanwhile, leaked emails confirmed that 5 more CEOs had quietly met with Malik's ethics council to conduct their own audits, hotels' private lounges, even high-speed rail networks in 2 continents. They weren't apologizing publicly. They were preemptively adjusting a sign Malik valued more than platitudes. Back in his Durrani office, Malik sat before a digital table covered with a holographic archive of the AIR Vault. The Airborne Inequity Registry now live in 3 languages. Every pin represented a recorded event: voice logs, seating denials, customer complaint redactions. When zoomed out, it looked like a star map, but each star was a scar. He tapped a pin over a 2022 flight between Madrid and Johannesburg. The description read, "Passenger with cultural attire asked to dress more businesslike before takeoff." A second pin-deaf traveler denied pre-boarding due to priority roster error, and a third young black woman accused of using a fake first-class ticket verified in minutes, but offered no apology. He froze. That last one had a name attached: Zena Ward. His fingers hovered. He remembered her. 10 years ago, she was an intern at a logistics summit in Singapore. She had thanked him afterward for a panel he gave on invisible professionalism. Now she was a software engineer, still flying coach. He flagged her case internally. Possible mentorship opportunity. Escalate. Outside, the sun began to set behind the Darien skyline, streaking the air in amber and coral. Malik rose from his desk, crossed the room, and picked up a thick white binder marked Legacy Partnerships. Inside, early drafts for his next initiative, the Quiet Cabin Project, a certification system where airlines that met dignity benchmarks could label part of their aircraft as equity first class. It wouldn't be about plush seats. It would be about procedure, from how names were spoken to how seating was assigned to how service was administered. It was subtle, but it would be unignorable. Troy entered without knocking, tablet in hand. "They want your quote," he said. "Who? The International Review Committee. They're presenting the 7-seat doctrine before the UN Transport Council. They want a message to anchor the proposal." Malik thought for a long moment, then nodded. "Tell them this," he said. "If you have to look at someone to decide whether they belong in seat 1A, you shouldn't be managing seat 1A. Troy smiled. "Perfect." Malik turned back toward the window, his reflections superimposed over the glowing city. Below him, flights still crisscrossed the sky. Business people, students, parents, travelers, all still trusting that behind every ticket was dignity. Malik no longer hoped. He had started building it. In the days that followed, the world began to echo Malik Darnell's quiet defiance. It wasn't just hashtags or reposts anymore. It was policy meetings in boardrooms that once dismissed equity as PR strategy. It was debriefings at aviation colleges where Malik's name entered the curriculum under modern compliance frameworks. It was whispered acknowledgments from former skeptics who now saw the folding chair as a line they'd never noticed until it became a headline. But Malik didn't care for applause. His attention was fixed on an email. Subject proposed passenger recognition framework, Tier 0 activation. It had come from the Civil Aviation Council's chairwoman, Elena Vosk, a longtime advocate for reform, who had faced her own internal resistance for years. She proposed something unprecedented, a new flight classification for individuals whose work intersected human rights, civil infrastructure, and systems innovation. Individuals like Malik, whose presence on board carried national significance. Malik responded in one sentence, "You don't solve discrimination with tears." Instead, he counter-proposed the equal boarding standard, a system where the entire plane, regardless of class, followed a single behavioral protocol, no preferential tone, no visual judgment, no assumption of legitimacy based on dress, speech, or skin. Every passenger would be treated as though they belonged in 1A. No upgrades, just upgraded respect. The proposal made its way through internal vetting at lightning speed. Within 72 hours, 11 airlines had signed interest declarations. 3 agreed to pilot the program. Skyjet, however, remained silent. In their headquarters, the mood had shifted from fear to fatigue. Executives complained behind closed doors that they had done enough public apology policy overhaul, partnership pledges. What more did Darnell want? "He wants a throne," one VP scoffed. No, Malik wanted an overhaul, and they hadn't even started. Meanwhile, a new voice entered the arena. Zena Ward, the young woman Malik had flagged in the AIR vault, published an essay titled, "We board planes in alphabetical order, but we land by power." It went viral. In it, she recounted her own humiliation, but more poignantly, she connected it to a broader architecture of exclusion, how discrimination in air travel mirrored corporate hierarchies, healthcare accesses, housing policies. She wrote, "The folding chair isn't rare, it's just rarely caught on camera." The quote exploded. It became the tagline for Onyx Tech's upcoming documentary, Cabin Class: The Invisible Blueprint of Disrespect. Malik didn't appear in it. His team had convinced him to narrate, his voice steady and surgical, guiding viewers through reenactments, cockpit recordings, training module footage, and interviews with passengers of all backgrounds. One segment, raw and emotional, showed a Latina nurse who had been asked to justify her upgraded ticket with medical ID she wasn't carrying at the time. Another followed a South Asian family misidentified as security risks when their father had simply been praying near Gate 6. These were not isolated events. They were a system, and now the system was on trial. Late one evening, Malik stood on the rooftop of the solar tower, wind tugging at his jacket. Below, the lights of Deranged shimmered. Behind him, Troy emerged with an update. "They released the internal Skyjet employee footage," he said. Malik turned slowly. "All of it?" Troy nodded. "Even the pre-boarding meeting logs. It's worse than we thought. The decision to offer you the folding chair wasn't last minute. It was discussed, pre-approved." Malik inhaled once deeply. They had planned it. It hadn't been a mistake. It had been designed. "How bad's the backlash?" Malik asked, already knowing. Troy checked his tablet. 3 major advertisers dropped. Stock down 12%. The CEO is expected to resign by Friday. Malik didn't flinch. Instead, he walked back inside. On his desk sat a white envelope sealed with the emblem of the Passenger Rights Committee. Inside, an invitation to serve as chief ethical architect for a proposed global passenger dignity charter, a role that would give him direct influence over how travel policies were shaped in 47 countries. Malik picked it up and turned it slowly in his hands. And then he set it down. "I'll write my own charter," he said, "then let them adopt it." Troy smiled. Of course. Elsewhere, protest signs appeared in airport terminals, folding chairs with red slashes through them, slogans painted in neat block letters, "We don't sit there anymore." Fold their bias, not our dignity. Cabin class is a mindset. A silent movement was now making noise. And Malik, he was already planning the next phase. A global symposium titled Access, bringing together architects, ethicists, technologists, and pilots to redesign what mobility meant in a post-Malik world. Because this wasn't about planes anymore. It was about systems, and he intended to land every one of them. The morning of the Access Symposium began with rain. Not the kind that disrupts or delays, but the quiet kind, light, persistent cleansing. From the massive glass facade of the Solar Convention Hall in Deranged City, the drops streaked like threads of memory down 40-foot panes, casting prism-like reflections on the polished marble floor inside. Delegates from 52 countries had gathered not for a trade deal or a defense summit, but for a conversation on dignity. Malik Darnell arrived early, not with a motorcade, not through the VIP tunnel. He walked through the front entrance, past volunteers, past press cameras, past security that didn't realize they were watching the man who had 8 months earlier forced the aviation industry into its first ethical emergency landing. He wore no tie, a gray blazer over a black shirt. The only item of significance was the onyx tech pin on his lapel titanium mat shaped like a folded chair, now rendered upright. He paused for a moment at the threshold of the Grand Hall and looked out over a crowd unlike any other CEOs sat next to airport janitors, former flight attendants beside union negotiators, AI engineers beside cultural anthropologists. No tiers, no roped-off sections, everyone equal. The folding chair was gone. In its place at the center of the main stage stood an empty first-class seat, not as a pedestal, as a question. Malik approached the podium slowly. His speech printed and folded in his pocket remained there. He wouldn't need it. He spoke without notes, without slides, just silence before sound. When I was offered a folding chair on a billion-dollar aircraft, he began, they weren't just denying me a seat. They were denying a symbol of presence, of worth, of earned belonging. His voice was calm, unhurried. They didn't expect me to sit down quietly, but they also didn't expect me to stand up without shouting. Laughter in the audience, brief understanding. They called it a misunderstanding. I called it a design flaw. And the truth is, it wasn't just about me. He let the silence linger. This summit is not about aviation. It's about how we board every system, schools, boardrooms, security checkpoints, bank counters, corporate ladders, and how many folding chairs still exist in places where real seats should be. A pause. We are not here to fix courtesy. We are here to challenge architecture. To ask who builds the doors, who holds the keys, who decides what comfort looks like, and why it keeps arriving last to the people who've earned it first. The room was still. Today we unveil the Access Charter. Behind him a screen illuminated with a single sentence in white. Every journey begins with dignity, or it shouldn't begin at all. He turned back. This charter is not just policy, it is a template. A system of checks for every institution that has ever confused appearance with authority. We've spent decades teaching employees to smile while ignoring the systems that train them to judge. He raised a hand. No more folded apologies. No more backroom memos. This document will live publicly. It will be voted on, audited, tracked in real time, and it will start with us. Applause now. Rising. Skyjet has signed. North Delta signed. Arvo Rail signed. And today Onyx Tech commits not just to transport, but to transparency. We will not partner with any institution that cannot certify dignity across every level of passenger and staff experience. A standing ovation began, but Malik held it back with one motion. One more thing, he said. From his coat pocket, he pulled a small square object. It was the folding chair reassembled in miniature cast in metal, mounted on a black marble base. This, he said, raising it in one hand, is not a symbol of what was done to me. He placed it on the podium. It's a reminder of what we'll never allow again. He stepped back and let the silence speak. Later that night, Malik walked alone through the now empty hall. The seat remained center stage, but now beneath it someone had placed a small card, handwritten, no signature. It read, not just a seat, a system, not just a man, a movement. He smiled, not out of triumph, but because he knew that the landing wasn't the end. It was the beginning, a new runway, a new direction, a world where dignity didn't have to be demanded, only delivered. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching and see you next time.